Okay, so far we've talked about two different kinds of elasticity. First, we talked about regular price elasticity of demand, or the general term elasticity, right? It's the default. So price elasticity of demand measures how quantity demanded changes as a result of a price change. Okay. Then we introduced a second good, and we called that the cross price elasticity of demand. So cross price elasticity of demand is how a price change in good 1 affects a quantity demanded change in good 2. Okay. And we said that if the cross price elasticity of demand was greater than 0, then you have substitutes. If the cross price elasticity of demand is less than 0, then you have complements. And then we gave a bunch of different categories for regular price elasticity of demand, if it's perfectly inelastic, perfectly elastic, etc. Now I want to talk about something called price elasticity of supply, which, again, these names shouldn't be too confusing. The name kind of gives it away. It's the quantity supply change as a result of a price change. Okay, so it's just like the price elasticity of demand, except now instead of talking about quantity demanded, we're talking about quantity supplied. Okay, so price elasticity of supply determines how producers change their quantity supplied in response to price. So the formula is exactly the same, except that these Q new and Q old, they're related to the quantity supplied, not the quantity demanded now. Okay. Everything else is the same. So what are some of the factors that determine price elasticity of demand? Well, or excuse me, of supply. Well, the availability of inputs matters. If the price increases, but you can't make the good because you're limited by the market for inputs, the supply chain. Well, you're not going to be able to expand your supply. You're not going to be able to shift your quantity supplied out. So if you're, even if the price changes, you can't appropriately seize on that. Well, that's going to limit the price elasticity of supply. What else? Time. So even if you have lower inputs, if you know that the price change isn't going to happen for another year, well, that gives you time to adapt, find a new provider so that you can produce your good. Okay. So that time increases the elasticity. Okay, so those are the two big determinants of how elastic the supply could be. Okay. One thing to note is that it's common to have perfectly elastic supply when there's something called perfect competition. So in perfect competition, your supply curve is going to look like this. Okay. So regardless if demand is here, you're going to produce at the same price no matter what. Okay. Because if you don't produce it, someone else will. The supply, like the you have no essentially control over the price. Okay. So this is a very common model, which we'll talk about later. Okay. All right. So I'm going to just continue rolling and move on to the next slide because I think it's the last one. So the next and final one is income elasticity of demand, which again is given away by its title. So it's how does income changes, this time not price changes, how do income changes affect the quantity demanded? Okay. And just like the other formulas, it's essentially percent change in quantity demanded over percent change in income. So it's a percent change of one thing over percent change of another. Okay. So in this case, instead of being percent change in quantity demanded, instead of being percent change in quantity demanded over percent change in price, it's now percent change in income. So you have your income new minus your income old over income average. Everything else is the same. I want to get rid of this eraser, but I didn't see the options. Whatever. Anyway, so what does this remind you of? Just like the cross-price elasticity of demand tells you if something is a substitute or a complement, income elasticity of demand tells you whether a good is normal or inferior. Okay. So if your income goes up, right, that means I new is greater than I old. So the denominator is positive, right? I new minus I old must be greater than 0 if your income goes up. So if your income goes up and Q new minus Q old is greater than 0, so you increase your quantity demanded. So this is going to be positive. Denominator is going to be positive. Income elasticity of demand is going to be greater than 0. Okay. So if your income elasticity of demand is greater than 0, that means that as your income increases, your quantity demanded increases. What kind of good is that? That's a normal good. A normal good is a good for which when income increases, quantity demanded increases. Okay. Likewise, if your income elasticity of demand is less than 0, that means as income increases, the denominator is greater than 0, but the numerator must be less than 0. You have a change from quantity new must be less than your quantity old. So the denominator is less than 0. Denominator is greater than 0. Numerator is less than 0. Whole fraction must be less than 0. So you have an inferior good when your income elasticity of demand is less than 0. Okay. All right. So that's really it. And then we just have a final recap question. Which of these goods might be considered highly elastic? And I'll let you answer that on Blackboard, and then I'll kind of explain. All right.